It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. We're experiencing a little difficulty with video streaming this morning, and we'll bring that up for you as soon as possible. Apologize if you're one of the folks that's normally catching the program live on our website. I apologize for the delay. We'll get that up as soon as we possibly can. A couple of things we're going to talk about this morning because there are a host of issues that are, and we're going to cover a lot of ground this morning, so if you'll just bear with us. I've got a quick update on some stuff going on in Missouri, including two brand new issues, including one that's a constitutional amendment that's been approved now for a gun rights amendment to the state constitution, and then the second issue would be the change that has been accomplished in Common Core. And the House yesterday passed, and the Senate both have passed, a limitation on the Common Core, to eliminate Common Core from Missouri state schools. Now, they've the Missouri State Common Core issue has passed through both the House and the Senate. The bills have both gone through the Joint Conference Committee stage, and at this point, we'll see whether or not the governor is going to sign it. Now, the governor was not only an instigator, but a massive supporter of Common Core. And so whether or not he'll sign this is HB 1490. And basically it returns to the local school communities and school districts full control of their curriculum. And basically it will allow it to happen in 2016 and 2017 because the governor has already obligated us in this state to institute Common Core in defiance of the requests of parents. So anyway, the second issue is the issue of the Missouri gun rights. SJR, Senate Joint Resolution 36, has finally been agreed and passed, and it will now be on the November ballot. And this is essentially a state constitutional amendment, and here's what it says. Article 1, Section 23, that the right of every citizen to keep and bear arms, ammunition, and accessories typical to the normal function of such arms in defense of his home, person, family, and property, or when lawfully summoned in aid of the civil power, shall not be questioned. The rights guaranteed by this section shall be unalienable. Any restriction on these rights shall be subject to strict scrutiny, and the state of Missouri shall be obligated to uphold these rights and shall under no circumstances decline to protect against their infringement. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent the General Assembly from enacting general laws which limit the rights of convicted violent felons or those adjudicated by a court to be a danger to self or others as a result of a mental disorder or mental infirmity. This will hit the ballot in November. It's been a long time coming, and while most of us would sit and argue that we really don't need to be told that our rights are unalienable because we know that to begin with, we can't disagree with the realities that we know that the federal government is diligently working to usurp those rights, and this will ensure that they cannot do that. So upshot is, I'm pleased with it. There are some things that I'm not crazy about, but okay, enough of that. So the upshot of this next, or our topics this morning is going to be this. SAMissiles are showing up, ladies and gentlemen, in Syria. Now that should surprise no one because, one, there were 20,000 missiles stolen in 2011 from Libya, surface-to-air missiles. These are anti-aircraft, heat-seeking missiles. Stolen because the Obama administration had refused to place security at the warehouses where they were. Now, that went virtually unnoticed because the mainstream media didn't do a very good job of exposing that. But these SAM missiles are now showing up in Syria. Surprise, surprise. Is Benghazi ringing a bell to anyone out there? It should be, because that is one of the areas in which this whole issue around Benghazi was dealing. You see, in case you've forgotten about these 20,000 SAMs, and yes, I say and mean 20,000 heat-seeking surface-to-air missiles, they were stolen from Libya, and amazingly enough, I'm gonna play you an audio piece where the one of the representatives of the Secretary of State or State Department is sitting there saying, we're diligently working with the rebels in Libya to try to reclaim them. I mean, you kidding me? 20,000 of these are missing, which endangers not only military flights and helicopters and our military people overseas, but also civilian flights. I mean, these are terrorists after all, folks. Or have we forgotten? I'll tell you, the incompetence, the ineptitude, the willful assistance and aiding and abetting that this administration has given to the enemy is just beyond comprehension. I got to tell you, folks, it's just so out of control and so out of hand. It's amazing to me that we are still operating as a nation. Our second topic this morning is going to be the FBI investigating Bundy Militia. And arrests should be expected, folks. They are going to utilize the FBI to go after people for pointing weapons at the law enforcement agents that were involved there. And you can bet this isn't over. We got to be prepared, by the way, to make sure that we are willing and ready and able to assist anyone who is going to be arrested from the FBI that was there. I don't care if you hide these people away. Okay? Somehow, some way, anybody who was involved in that event is going to start getting knocks on their doors. They're going to get raided. You watch and see. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You wait and you'll see exactly what I mean by that. Our fourth topic, EMP hearings. Is there? Oh, and by the way, in our second segment, we're also going to touch on this knucklehead over at the EPA who was watching 6 hours of porn a day. He got a bonus for performance. I got to wonder what kind of performance that was. And nobody seems to, look, ladies and gentlemen, he's not unusual. He's one of the average people that's working in these agencies. It wasn't long ago that the SEC had a guy they caught who had so much porn downloaded, he was swapping out hard drives to store it all. And he had literally hundreds of DVDs stored away that he had been downloading and recording. It's just insane. It's a sad statement and a sad cry on America that this is the case. And listen, I don't care if you watch porn. That's your business. But don't do it on the government's dime, and don't do it when the taxpayers are getting paid for it. In the EPA's case, maybe we're lucky because basically at that stage in the game, we know that the person, whoever it is, can't do us any harm. But that's a whole nother discussion. All right, our third topic is going to be the EMP hearings. There is a series of hearings that's going on out there about the EMP issue and the vulnerability of our electronic grid. But I've got to tell you, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack about this. I know I'm going to be hearing, that I'm a doom and gloom guy and all that nonsense. But I'm beginning to see a pattern that is related to the discussion of EMP and grid and electronics and so forth and so on. And I got to tell you, it's frightening because this is the exact kind of propaganda that the Ministry of Propaganda and the mainstream media would spread to make sure that people are all aware that it can happen, so that in the event that the Ministry of Propaganda and the government brainwashing, is needed to be brought to bear when the government needs a false flag to cover up an economic collapse that's virtually imminent, folks, then they can blame it on any of the host of actors that they've demonized. China, North Korea, Russia, anybody they want. In fact, the truth of the matter is, Iran, by the way, is another candidate for that. The truth is, even if it was to happen, that investigation would be held like every other investigation. Nobody would ever know. It would be, we never really figured it out. All the while achieving the penultimate goal of the massive depopulation and the decimation of literally, 100, 150, 200 million Americans? What a way to introduce Agenda 21, huh? How convenient. We're going to talk about it. I know it's a theory, and I'm not suggesting that that is a false flag that's, but I don't put anything past these people, and you shouldn't either. All right, our fourth topic this morning will be the Fed chairman. Janet Yellen came out yesterday and said she doesn't know whether or not we're a capitalist nation or an oligarchy. Now, she was asked by Bernie Sanders, and of course she obfuscated around the question. She didn't come out right. She didn't use the word oligarchy. He did. But she couldn't define it. She couldn't answer. I mean, it's insane. All right, let's get into our first topic because we're really short on time today if we want to cover all this ground. In our first topic, these SAM missiles are showing up in Syria, and they're being used by Islamic terrorist fighters and Islamic rebels. Now, look, I'm so tired of hearing that we can't identify who's who over there, and I'm so tired of hearing that we don't know who's a terrorist and who's not. You got this Boko Haram group out there has kidnapped these 300 kids. And, where is the government for that stuff? I mean, Hillary Clinton was the one who refused adamantly to label them as a terrorist group. She fought actively against naming them. So did the president. He could have overridden her, but he didn't. They were begged and they were pled with by the CIA, by Congress, by other agencies, the Department of Justice, and numerous other agencies to label and categorize the Boko Haram as a terrorist group. And she fought actively not to. Barack Obama refused to override her. 59 young boys were just killed a couple of months ago. Now they've got 300 girls between the ages of 10 and 15 or 12 and 15 who, for all we know, are being raped and mutilated, and he's promised to sell them into slavery. You know who is responsible for that? Hillary Clinton. Despite pleas from everyone involved, she steadfastly refused to add them. Now, the illegal in chief says that they have a legitimate concern. What? Are you insane? What have we allowed to happen to our nation? I got to ask you, folks. Obama administration came out yesterday and said that Boko Haram has legitimate concerns. You know who their targets are? Kids going to school and Christians. That's it. Tell that to the mothers and fathers of the 59 boys who were murdered. Tell that to the mothers and fathers of the 300 girls who are currently being held by them and kidnapped. That they have a legitimate concern. Explain that to me, Barack Obama. Why? Because their kids wanted an education? Because they wanted the freedom to worship? Or their parents wanted the freedom to worship? So what are you going to do, steal their kids? Tell me that's not a terrorist act. I guess Barack Obama believes in the old slavery adage of, don't let them learn how to read or they'll demand their freedom. Folks, it's so far over the top. It really is. These SAM missiles are missing. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that the Islamic Front, a large coalition of mainly Islamic fighting groups, are using U.S. TOW missiles in clashes in Aleppo against the forces of Bashar al-Assad and his allies. Well, let me refresh your memory with this ABC News report that happened in September of 2011, because this report from Nightline clearly exposes the fact that 20,000 missiles were stolen because we didn't provide security at the warehouses where they were being held. 20,000 surface-to-air missiles.
For months now, Libya has been a lawless zone open to fighters who would have poured in from across Africa and beyond. It is feared that those fighters include al-Qaeda members, and tonight a disturbing new addition to the mix. Thousands of missiles have gone missing, missiles that could take out a plane. Tonight, ABC's Brian Ross reports. Brian?
Cynthia, the U.S. has known for years about the danger posed by the portable missiles to civilian aircraft, but concluded there were very few really available to terrorists. Now that calculation has changed because of the chaos in Libya, which had a stockpile of 20,000 of the missiles before the war. No one knows tonight where they all are. Just one of these missiles in the wrong hands could be a disaster.
Elevator.
As seen in this U.S. Army test of an American-made missile locking in on a small aircraft.
They're heat-seeking missiles, so they lock in on the engines of these airplanes when they're flying relatively low. And they very easily can take out a civilian airplane.
In 2003, Iraqi insurgents used one of them to hit a DHL cargo plane out of Baghdad, which burst into flames but was able to land.
The threat is an obvious one. This isn't something anybody's making up, and matching up a terrorist with a shoulder-fired missile, that's our worst nightmare.
Now made more real with what's been happening in Libya, where an unknown number of that country's stockpile of 20,000 missiles has gone missing, looted from unguarded warehouses, the empty crates left behind.
It is one of the greatest stockpiles of these weapons that has ever gone on the loose.
Peter Buchard of Human Rights Watch first spotted the problem in a March trip to Libya.
I myself could have removed several hundred if I wanted to.
The U.S. says over the last 6 months, it's been working with the Libyan rebels to secure the arms depots.
We're making progress, and we expect that over the coming days and weeks, we will have a much greater picture of how many are missing.
But the missiles are continuing to disappear. Peter Buchard took these pictures just 3 weeks ago, showing even more of the portable missiles being carted off in the back of a pickup truck, despite the best U.S. efforts to shut the door.
Well, I certainly think that they realize that they are in a very difficult situation now. Once these missiles walk away from these facilities, they're very difficult to get back.
And there is great concern they could end up in the hands of al-Qaeda, which is active in the region.
I think the probability of al-Qaeda being able to smuggle some of these Stinger-like missiles out of Libya is probably pretty high.
With the exception of Israel, no country has spent the money to protect its passenger jets from heat-seeking missiles. They are easy targets. Today in Congress, that fear led to calls for the Defense Department to provide civilian aircraft with new systems that could defeat the missile threat.
I think we...
All right, so you get the idea here. This was a report back from 2011, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, it's unconscionable that these weapons have been allowed to float freely out there. You know doggone well they're only in the hands of al-Qaeda. And even if the people who stole them, which were just opportunists who thought, hey, if all of these things are sitting here unguarded and exposed, I can grab some and sell them and feed my family. Who's he selling them to? That's the point. The truth of the matter is that this nation has allowed, and I say allowed, meaning willfully allowed this kind of thing to go on. I believe that at this stage in the game, it's almost impossible for us to believe that this is anything other than a specifically targeted and willful attempt by this administration to aid and assist al-Qaeda in forcing their ideas of Islamic Sharia on a global basis. I can't see any other alternative. There's nothing else that touches that excuses the behavior. Nothing. We know for a fact that Benghazi in 2012, September of 2012, a year later, was about smuggling not these same missiles, but other weapons to the same Syrian rebels, the ones they're using now. I got to tell you, I mean, you know, it'll never come out because nobody's ever going to let a sitting president, be accused of treason for aiding and abetting al-Qaeda. But I got to tell you, I don't need some kind of proof to see what we've done here. I don't need some kind of confirmation from the Ministry of Propaganda to tell me what I know. And you shouldn't either. This is unconscionable. And, it's not just a function of a war. I mean, we're talking 20,000 of these, folks. These things will be operational a decade, 20 years from now. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Before we go, I want to bring to your mind for you a couple of friends and sponsors of ours. Make sure that you visit these folks if there's any way that you can assist them and patronize their businesses, because these are the people that keep AVN on the air. First and foremost, you get a chance if you have an opportunity to go see our friends over at Atlas Survival Shelters. Ron is the owner over there, and these are the guys who build these massive underground shelters. These are ideal for any kind of a natural or man-made disaster. They have an opportunity to be buried on property where they can be completely isolated and hidden, and they have pretty much everything that you need in terms of self-sufficiency. It's atlassurvivalshelters.com, and you can also find their website or their Facebook page at facebook.com/Atlas Survival Shelters. Make sure that you go over there and like them. And if you can, send Ron a quick message and say, hey, we heard about you on AVN. Great product. Survival by Preparedness is a friend of mine who runs a website over there where you can buy all natural spring or grass-fed beef. And he has a lot of other products as well, including lamb and goat and some other things. So make sure that you see our friends over at Survival by Preparedness. They have also all kinds of products that are geared and designed for the preparedness individual. As well as our friends over at Battery Station. Please make sure that you visit their website, batterystation.com. These companies all ship around the country, so it doesn't make any difference where you are. Battery Station is one of the largest distributors of batteries in the nation. If you own a company or a business, if you use a lot of batteries in your own life, make sure that you give these guys a call. They're one of the largest distributors, and they ship all over the country and all over the world, frankly. They have the best prices you can find, and then they also carry a ton of other products, including all kinds of survival and preparedness gear, as well as the normal gamut of flashlights and things like that. They have a lot of ammunition and stuff like that. Give them a call at 417-257-7799. That's 417-257-7799. Visit their website at batterystation.com, where you can find them at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains, Missouri. Last but not least, if you're interested in getting a website for your business, please visit our friends over at airbridgeweb.com. That's airbridgeweb.com. Website development, and there's a whole ton of sites that you can see in their portfolio of sites that have been developed. It's a company I have an interest in, and so if you're in need of a website for your business, by all means, give a call or take a visit over to that website. It's airbridgeweb.com. airbridgeweb.com. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, FBI is investigating the Bundy Militia folks. We're going to talk a little bit about that because I promise you that this is going to come up again. And you can bet it's not going to be good for anybody who was caught on camera over there. And then we're also going to be talking about this idiot at the EPA who was busted literally watching 6 hours a day of pornography. Unbelievable. We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. All right. We're back. The Bundy Ranch thing, I think, changed the outlook of a lot of Americans about what our options are in the face of federal and government overreach. And I got to tell you, the FBI has now begun an investigation surrounding the showdown or the standoff or whatever you want to call it. And they are determined to identify individuals who were there and they are going to be, well, they've launched, in the words of their one of the TV channels out there, they let's see, they've launched a formal investigation into alleged death threats, intimidation, and possible weapon violations relating to the showdown. And they started out by interviewing Metro Police and Clark County Sheriff Doug Gillespie. Now, it's interesting because from what I saw, they're saying here in this article, which is full of all kinds of misinformation, talk about mainstream Ministry of Propaganda. They say here that last week the I-Team talked to, this is the television station, talked to Metro officers who intervened to protect the lives of federal employees from the 400 or so Bundy supporters and armed militia members. What? Ladies and gentlemen, don't believe your lying eyes in the video you watched where a bunch of unarmed people were standing there. Believe I-Team, who says that Metro officers intervened, which they didn't. They stood off to the side. They didn't intervene. They didn't interpose themselves between BLM and the militias or the citizens. Intervened where? How? They were standing off to the side to protect the lives of federal employees from the 400 or so Bundy supporters and armed militia members. They make it look like, with a statement like that the Bundy people were attacking them. Officers told the I-Team they feared for their lives that day because of the assembled firepower and because many in the crowd had pointed weapons at officers, taunted them, told them they should be ready to die. Go away or I will taunt you again. You remember that from Monty Python? The French guy at the top of the castle. Your mother wears elderberries. Or smells of elderberries. I mean, go away or I will taunt you again, right? I mean, how ridiculous. Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who was left in charge of the Metro contingent by Sheriff Doug Gillespie, who apparently was home sitting on the bowl because he was frightened, hiding under a desk, he told the I-Team that such alleged behavior would be the subject of a criminal investigation. The federal authorities are conducting an investigation, and I am pretty confident it is going to go into the future, said Lombardo. There would be consequences for somebody there on videotape. Yes, there is definitely going to be consequences. Definitely, said Lombardo. That is unacceptable behavior. If we let it go, it would continue into the future. Really? So what you're saying to us, Mr. Lombardo, is that citizens don't have a right to protect themselves against armed federal agents who aren't supposed to be armed in the first place, have no constitutional authority to have, 1, those weapons, or 2, even a SWAT-formed unit, 3, even justification for their existence. Are you out of your mind? FBI spoke to the entire squad, and they are then talked to the entire Metro organization. No, it is not a rumor. When we first got out there and made a left to divide I-15, that's all you saw. You saw kids and women and horses in the backdrop, and then men with guns laying on the ground in the back of pickup trucks. We're going, wow, this would never happen in Las Vegas. But it was there. That is not a rumor. It is reality, and I saw it with my own eyes, says Metro Police Sergeant Tom Jenkins. He also made a very interesting statement that they were hiding, these militia members were hiding behind women and children. I mean, I got to tell you, folks, what you don't realize is that this is the setup for what's coming. There are going to be a series of raids. I'm going to just make a prediction here. But we're going to start hearing about it, maybe not for a couple of weeks, maybe not even for a couple months, but suddenly we're going to hear about raid after raid after raid, where somebody's doors get kicked in, they're grabbed, all of their weapons are seized, and they are charged. You watch and see if that does not happen. There's another article out there from WorldNet Daily that covers basically some of the same information. And then there's another one out there from the Review Journal. And I'll post all three of these up to our YouTube description area so that you can find them and read them for yourself. FBI agents open a criminal investigation. Everyone anticipated that this would occur, says Gillespie. And I've said all along there has to be accountability for what took place on April 12th. Well, you're right, Sheriff Gillespie. The accountability should be that you should be removed from office for not having done what your job was to protect the citizens of your state and your county in the first place. The truth is, you single-handedly could have avoided the entire thing. Sheriff Gillespie, you had an opportunity to say to those federal agents, you have no business here, and you are interfering in my jurisdiction, and I overrule you, and you must leave now. Not you, however. You are a friend of Harry Reid and a supporter, and you benefit from the behavior of Harry Reid, and you are anxious to do whatever you can do to help destroy the liberty and the freedom of your own state, your own county. For what? Profit? What's your profit motive, Mr. Gillespie? What is your motive for betrayal? What's the price that you're getting to sell out the birthright of your countrymen? They're saying they're investigating allegations of threats and assaults. Well, where were the assaults? I didn't see any assault. Lombardo, who's running to succeed Gillespie this year, which tells you something right there. See, this is why, ladies and gentlemen, you always have to read every one of these articles very carefully. Because what happens is you'll see little tidbits in there, and you have to read between the lines. So Lombardo is getting his free election campaign ads being built right now. And remember that he's going to take all of these snippets and he's going to save them, and then his campaign people are going to turn these into election documents or election news ads, these news interviews to ads. And then they're going to use them when it comes time for him to be elected. Look at what a strong law enforcement man this fellow is. You watch and see. If you're in Nevada, I'm telling you exactly what this... I know how this works because I've talked to people who do this. I get interviewed by a news channel, and I save it. And it's a free 5-minute commercial I'd have to produce myself. I can't get a better commercial than that. Amazing. Lombardo is going to run to succeed Gillespie this year. So here's the question. Nobody's telling you where Gillespie's headed, and with good reason. They probably don't know. But I would love to watch and see a year after Gillespie has left the sheriff's department where he is and what's happening with Mr. Gillespie. You know, there was an article that came out the other day that talked about how all of this land surrounding where Bundy is has been bought up by a bunch of real estate developers. And because Bundy's water rights supersede theirs, that may have been another one of the reasons why they were trying to get him out of there. And so, here's the deal. What you can assume is that every one of these people on a governmental side of this who refuse to bring this thing to a close at an earlier date, peacefully, is deeply involved in the corruption of it. And the way that these articles are couched, they are written in such a way as to create an atmosphere where you were to fear, and they're rewriting history. They're rewriting history, folks. This is revisionist history. Perfect example is what I just read you in that ABC, or in that TV8 interview, where they were saying that these law enforcement officers interposed themselves between. They did not, and the video documents it and proves it. Nonsense. The truth is, you're never going to actually get truth from any media organization unless it's an alternative media group. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I am going to tell you this. Whatever you hear going forward about these Bundy supporters, whatever you hear about these militias going forward, do not, and I repeat it, do not believe it, because everything that you hear and see is going to be couched in a light that demonizes them. KLAS TV reports that Metro police members claimed that they feared for their lives because of so many armed supporters standing with the Bundys, who had, quote, pointed weapons at officers, taunted them, told them they should be ready to die. The truth is, that we are done as a nation, and now we're just waiting for the inevitable firepower and the real shooting to start. That's what I think. All right, let's tackle our second segment or topic for this segment, which is the EPA official who confirms that one of the bureaucrats within the EPA, this guy had 7,000 pornographic files downloaded into a government computer, and he was viewing them between 2 and 6 hours a day. He got bonuses for his performance, and I say that, well, I'll leave you to come to your own conclusions about that. And the fact of the matter is, this guy was actually watching porn when the investigator walked into his office. I mean, it's unbelievable. They won't name this guy. Why not? If it was you, they would name you. Why are they protecting this piece of trash? Bloomberg even has an article out on there. Porn-watching EPA employee found by agency watchdog. An employee at the EPA downloaded more than 7,000 pornographic files and viewed them 2 to 6 hours a day. The worker, who wasn't identified, was watching pornography when a special agent showed up at his workplace. I mean, and I got to tell you, folks, this is not all that unusual. Does anybody remember, it was only a year or so ago, that the SEC had a guy who was downloading so much pornography? And by the way, I'd have to find the article for you, but the SEC, there were so many people watching porn there, they were wondering how they were getting their jobs done. I mean, I will do a quick search for you. Securities Exchange Commission. These people were watching so much porn, and there were so many of them watching porn, that they couldn't possibly have been looking out for your best interests in I'm having a hard time even finding it here, which tells me that they're trying to make sure that nobody sees it. I mean, it's just unbelievable, guys. Then we're also addressing the guy at the EPA who stole $900,000 in pay and benefits, saying he was working for the CIA. And even his own supervisor, who should be watching out for what their employees are doing, and is writing him bonuses and writing his employee reviews. I mean, how can you write an employee review for a guy who's not even there and say he's doing a good job? How can you write an employee review for a guy who spends 2 to 6 hours every day watching porn and not functioning, and pay him a bonus? There are 16,000 employees at the EPA. And again, the Office of Inspector General, you see, here's the problem, folks. This is why I came up yesterday and I talked about that idea I had about civilian ombudsman. Because these people can't possibly do this and do it well, even if they are legitimate. And I'm talking about the IGs now, the Inspector Generals. Even if the IG is legitimate, and even if the IG is somebody who is doing the right things, they're overwhelmed. How do you watch 16,000 employees and watch the money and watch the policies? And, I mean, there's just too many things for them to watch. And that's why I'm suggesting that, and we're not going to ask, we're going to demand that the civilian ombudsman program be started. And you can start it in your own state. You can start it maybe even in your own county. How about a retired individual in your community who can go and become a watchdog for the county commission, for your local Department of Conservation, your local motor vehicle department, your local EPA. In the state of Missouri, they call it the Department of Natural Resources. I mean, it's the same thing, folks. They're supposed to have an IG. Every agency is. But they're overwhelmed, even if they're legitimate. Now, we're not going to even talk about the guy in the DHS who was actually accepting dinners and drinks and a promise of a better job if he'd modify his reports to protect and cover their butts. I mean, this is insane. Beale, this other guy who was stealing $900,000, I mean, he collected pay and benefits without even showing up for work, worth $500,000. The other $400,000 was for expenses he claimed that he was spending going on vacation to Europe, where he was sitting around in hotel rooms, vacationing. First of all, why is the EPA paying the CIA's bills if, in fact, that's for real? What kind of oversight and management is that? Williams, one of the overseers here, even more egregious is that this EPA manager authored and approved exemplary performance appraisals that resulted in cash awards for Beale, an absent employee. The employee caught viewing pornography, folks, he's still on the payroll. He earns $120,000 a year. Now, the case has been referred to the Justice Department. He's still on the payroll. What? Tell me, if you worked for a large corporation or even a small corporation, tell me if you worked for IBM. Tell me if you worked for L3 Communications. Tell me if you worked for AT&T, that you would be on the payroll and you would have not have been fired if you were caught spending 6 hours a day watching pornography on the company's computers and on their dime. What if the guy had been downloading child pornography? We don't know. And now he would have subjected the entire company to all kinds of danger. He's still on the payroll? Doing what? One of the sites that this guy was on, and I heard Issa mention, is something about sadism. I mean, you know, I got to tell you something. If you want to watch pornography, you're an adult. That's fine. Do what you want to do. I mean, it's up to you. It's like smoking pot, right? I don't smoke pot because I don't like it. I don't smoke pot because I don't want to do that to myself. But if you want to smoke pot, you go ahead. If you want to watch pornography, you go ahead. You're an adult. It's not a question of whether it's good or bad for you. It's not my place to tell you what to do. I can make a suggestion and say, hey, doing certain of these things is not necessarily a good idea for you because they're addictive behaviors and they preclude you from being able to do other things. In other words, if you're walking around stoned all the time and your brain isn't functioning at its highest level of performance because it's always dulled out and padded in cotton, then you're prohibited from reaching your highest and best use. But that's entirely up to you to do that to yourself. It's not my place to tell you not to. But if you work for me, I don't expect you to come into work stoned where you can't perform. I don't expect you to come into work stoned where you are risking your own self because your motor skills are bad and you might get your hand caught in a circular saw, or because your mental skills are bent and you can't perform the duties to which you've been assigned. The same thing goes for pornography. If you want to watch it at home, if you want to watch it in a movie theater, it's your business. But don't do it at work and expect that you're going to get paid. Clearly, this guy had a problem. I mean, anybody who's spending 6 hours, 2 to 6 hours a day, and I'll use their figure, 2 to 6 hours a day. I don't care, 2 hours a day. That person has a problem. It's not an excuse, but it just says that this guy shouldn't be at work anymore there. And why is his name hidden from us? Why isn't he being exposed for who and what he is? A thief, frankly. He's stealing from all of us. And that's what he's doing, folks. He's stealing. All of this is just symptomatic of a federal government that is so big, so enormous, so out of control, so unaccountable, so unused to being held accountable, that even when these things happen, they can't even after it's happened and it's been exposed, they cannot seem to get their act together enough to stop it. What the heck is going on with this kind of thing? I mean, they're so used to ambivalence and privilege that even after they catch a guy who hits the news that he's spending 6 hours a day watching pornography, they can't fire the guy. Are you flipping kidding me? You know, the thing with the VA is another one. The guy came out, and I'm just going to tap on this and then we're going to go. We're going to take a quick break. The guy who was talking, Shinseki, who was the head of the VA, he was appointed in, I think, 2009, if I'm not mistaken, by Obama. The VA is in total chaos, and I mean total. There is nothing that runs right in the VA. Nothing. Every VA hospital should be turned over and sold to a private corporation who will run it as a for-profit, and then every veteran given a VA insurance card so that they can go to a local hospital. First of all, the idea of having to travel hundreds of miles if you don't live in an urban marketplace to go to a hospital for care when you've got a perfectly good hospital right down the road from you is insane. Secondly, the care that they receive at the VA is substandard. Now, there are some specialty hospitals that the VA has that are meant for, serious injuries like, brain injuries and amputees and amputations and things like that, that for all intents and purposes should remain specialized towards veterans' specific and special needs. But, you know what? One of the things Shinseki he refused to quit. And he came out the other day and he said, he's not alone in this. Not only is he not quitting, but he can't fire the executive people in charge of it, because once you get above basically the level of janitor, you can't be fired. You cannot be fired. Period. Since when does management have a union deal that's so sweet that the unions are licking their chops for a deal like that? The whole country is upside down, folks. It really is. The whole country is upside down. And I'm telling you that this chaos is being done for a reason. It's to keep you confused, off balance, and unstable. Think of it like a political and social flashbang thrown into the room, intended to disorient you before the raid. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about these EMP hearings. Is there a false flag being drafted for a major national blackout that will help the United States wipe out the debt and achieve its goal of implementation of Agenda 21? I'm beginning to wonder. We're going to play a what-if scenario here. We'll be right back.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here this morning. And one of the things that we do here in this program is we expose the Ministry of Propaganda, a.k.a. the mainstream media, for what it is. An indoctrination and brainwashing programming system to keep you off balance, off kilter, and disoriented, frankly. And I got to tell you, when I see stuff that comes out in the news, oftentimes I wonder how much of it is propaganda being fostered into our minds. And, you know, I know that most people in the United States of America, because we've never had conflict within our lifetimes on our shores, because we grew up in a country where we believed that our government was different than, you know, the tyrannical regimes around the world, that we believe that and labor under the false delusion that our Uncle Sam is this, you know, this beneficent, good uncle. And in fact, he's a lecherous thief, and he's a drug addict, and he's the number one distributor of drugs around the planet, and he's robbing us blind, and selling our children into slavery, but, you know, we refuse to see the truth, right? Well, one of the things that's happening lately is there's been an enormous amount of outcry about this risk of EMP, electromagnetic pulse, whether that be, you know, natural through the sun, or whether it be through a man-made event, which would, you know, be an attack. We've brought out repeatedly that the cost to fix our grid, and there's no way to proof everything for EMP. But there are ways to protect the grid so that, you know, while your iPod may be fried, and while your toaster may never work again, and your computer is probably cooked, at least we don't lose power across the board, and your refrigerator will still work to keep your insulin refrigerated so you can survive. Okay? Why? Because your refrigerator doesn't have electronic components. It's the same, you know, circuitry. Will refrigerators make? We don't know. And because nobody's ever experienced it, and there's no way to test and say, well, let's just do a massive EMP and see what happens, because we'd be causing our own demise. But here's the problem. The numbers of Americans that would be eliminated in the first 30 or 60 or 90 days of an event like that. And we're not talking about, you know, like a snowstorm blackout, right? Or the blackout like they had in New York, which lasted, what, a couple of days, a week, and, you know, everybody was at each other's throat. They were ready to kill each other over water and food and blah, 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 blah. And that was an isolated city where help could get to it. Imagine what it would be like if the entire nation, or a massive chunk of the nation, you know, half or a third or three-quarters or something, was suddenly permanently without power. And when I say permanently, I mean at a minimum months, possibly years. Because the infrastructure that would be required to be replaced under an electromagnetic pulse EMP event, whether that be natural or man-made, would be staggering in the sense that most of the major transformers are irreplaceable within a realistic time frame to get them back online. In other words, one, we don't make them here anymore. Most of them are made, you know, or used to be made here in the United States by companies like GE and so forth. But they moved all that manufacturing overseas. And these things are massive. So it's not like you can just stick one on the back of a C-130 and fly it over to Kansas and drop it off over there. These things would have to be built. It would take months or even years to build them. And then they'd have to be transported from there to here. And then they'd have to be transported from the coast, wherever they came in on a ship, to the physical location where they're needed. And using Kansas as the example, imagine how long it would take to move something like that overland when there's no power. Hello? The streets are clogged with cars that haven't moved in a year and a half, and now suddenly this thing is here and we can't get it there. You see, here's my concern. I'm beginning to wonder, because we see this pattern emerge time and time and time and time again. We're given this phantom enemy to fear. We're led to believe that government can be our only savior. And then ultimately, when the event actually occurs and the event is intended to be, well, let's call it a false flag, for cover for another project or another problem, then, everybody points the fingers and so forth. Oh, we were trying to investigate who did it and so forth and so on. I'm going to give you an example. And I'm not suggesting that I can speak emphatically on this one way or another. But, the day before 9/11, it was announced that $2 trillion was missing. Trillion. I didn't say billion. I said trillion with a T. And suddenly, the nation's attention was diverted. We have a massive debt in this country that we cannot possibly hope to pay back. And it's time we just recognized it. And I can show you examples of how we know that to be the truth. It's so obvious when you look at the spending that's going on in the country. And these guys aren't even heeding the warning signs because they know that there's something else on the horizon, a solution. And it isn't paying it back. It's the collapse. They know this is going to collapse. Do you think for a minute these people in Congress are not cognizant of the fact that we have an unsustainable and unrepayable debt? That we owe nations like China $1.3 trillion, Japan $1.1 trillion. I mean, that's $2.5 trillion right off the bat. Just the two countries. Now, granted, they're the two biggest debt holders, but we're talking two countries that own $2.5 trillion worth of debt. What are they going to want from us when our economy or the global economy collapses? Hello? Natural resources? Vast ownership of all of the federal lands out west, maybe, perhaps? Here's what I'm saying. Nothing that you can conceive of is too fantastic for the government to actually be behind. That there is nothing that you might engender in your mind as a conspiratorial view that is, one, not possible, and two, not a probable scenario that they've not already run through. And if you think I'm kidding, they have literally hundreds of billions of dollars worth of computers that run what-if scenarios all day. What if there was a nuclear detonation from a foreign nation through ICBMs? What if there was one missile that hit? What if 10 missiles hit? What if they hit in these cities? What would happen? What if we had a pandemic virus that struck the nation and you watch the red map, spread across the nation? Don't you think that they've run these same scenarios? What would happen with an EMP blast? Don't kid yourself. They have. An EMP blast happens so high up in the atmosphere that it doesn't cause any damage on the ground. There's not even any fallout. But everything electric is permanently fried. Permanently. Now, think about the concept of a globe that wants globalization and the end of borders and state or nation state sovereignty. Think about a world that wants to implement and multi-billionaires and many of them who want to implement an oligarchical form of government that is global in its scope, not just national. And then recognize that there is one impediment to achieving that, because the rest of the world has already been disarmed and, for the most part, subjugated. That one impediment happens to own one of the largest continents as an individual country, as a single standalone country. And in addition to that, we happen to have vast natural resources that would, unimaginably maintain that oligarchy we have some, when I talk about natural resources, I'm not just talking about oil and things like that. We have vast areas where we can grow food in this country. And we have a vast population that, quite frankly, needs to be enslaved for these people to achieve their goals. Now, you may think to yourself, this guy's writing a science fiction book. Okay, I'm not suggesting that this is some dyed-in-the-wool, cast-in-stone plan. I'm just telling you that if you don't think our government has not already run through this scenario 10,000 ways from Sunday, you're operating under delusion. And when you have multi-billionaires, people like Gates and Soros, and even the Koch brothers, and everybody else who's involved in all of these tangled webs of how do I influence politics? Because here's the problem. These people are essentially buying or buying our government. And we're going to talk about that in our next segment when we talk about Fed Reserve Chairman Yellen is unsure if we're a capitalist democracy or if we're an oligarchy. She couldn't answer the question. Well, I can answer you the question. Princeton University and Northwestern University just released a study in April that says the United States is no longer a republic, it is now an oligarchy. Princeton University and Northwestern. Not exactly what you would call bastions of free thought. And the right or conservative movement. And it's their assessment, not mine, that we have lost control of the republic to the ultra-wealthy, the influence peddlers, and special interests. Translate that to ultra-wealthy. That's it. And the ultra-wealthy own what? The corporations. They use those as the funnel to get money to Congress, to do as they choose. For Congress to do as they're ordered to do, which is the company's choice of what they want, because all we are to them is a resource. Did you ever notice, maybe 20 years ago, the name of your HR department went from personnel to human resources? Think about that for a moment. You're a human resource. I know for most people that's like, whoosh, goes right over their head. Think about it. You are a human resource. You're a worker bee. They're not interested in your individual well-being. They don't care about whether your wife has a great vacation or your child has a good career or you've had a great experience at work this month. They couldn't care less. You are there to achieve something for them. And if at any point in time you cease to be a performer, you're gone. Now, unlike the federal government, where we've created these make-work bureaucracies that do absolutely nothing but just, suck up enormous resources, the government doesn't even produce anything. At least corporations, as, megamaniacal as they are, they produce something. Government doesn't produce a damn thing. All government does is demand that you pay for it. That's all they do. And here's the problem that we have with this EMP issue. The Phantom is always used in a propagandic format by fascist governments, which is what I've just been describing to you. I mean, the merger of government and corporations is fascism. No, it's not the kind of fascism you think of that immediately jumps to mind, which is Nazism. But go read the definition of fascism, ladies and gentlemen, and realize that it doesn't necessarily have to take the form of Nazism, although it can and probably will here too. Maybe not towards Jews, but you'll see. I mean, time will tell, But ultimately, here's the problem. Where we are at this stage in the game is that every time government wants to inject themselves into this position of authority and manipulation, they create a phantom risk. It's one of the planks of fascism. They create a phantom risk, and they get everybody, all facing in the same direction, saying, "Yeah, let's get that guy." Then they can manipulate the information that comes across. And, of course, we did this with Iran. We did it with Iraq. We did it with Afghanistan. We did it in Vietnam. We did it in Korea. The Phantom Menace. What do you think the title from Star Wars came from? The Phantom Menace that government wants us all to believe in. And then they can then use that fear to increase their own power and influence. You were mind-controlled and manipulated into believing that it existed in the first place. So, if really what this is the steps of mind control and manipulation to get you indoctrinated into the principle that the entire nation could be brought to a screeching halt and collapse, so that government can institute something that they cannot do any other way. They cannot wait another 50, 80, 100 years to get generation after generation after generation manipulated to the point where everybody says, okay, you're right, we shouldn't all have individual firearms and be willing to defend ourselves and our families and our states and our country. They can't wait that long. You know why? Because the rest of the world won't allow it. Don't you see a global uprising going on everywhere around you? Everywhere, people are rising up against tyranny. And they've got to knock it down, and we're at the 11th hour and 59th minute. And so one way to get rid of a lot of that problem and get rid of a lot of the population at the same time, which is definitely a cornerstone of Agenda 21, shut off the power. And do it for 6 months. And watch 100 million people evaporate out of existence. Not to mention the fact that when the lights come back on, you'll find that the stage has been reset, the chairs have been rearranged, and everything is different. There are no more states. There is no more state sovereignty. The Constitution has been completely eviscerated, and you're now under the domination of the federal state. Think that's a far cry from reality? Okay. I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just positing it as one example of how all of this can be used against you. But when these guys are constantly throwing this out there in the media about how devastating this EMP would be. I mean, Trent Franks was discussing this. I mean, he's literally saying here that, we could lose a third of our population. Now, is he part of it? I don't think so, but, who knows? Is he just a tool being used or a pawn in the game? I don't know. Perry says, Subcommittee Vice Chairman Scott Perry says, currently the nations of Russia and China have the technology to launch an EMP attack, and we have speculated that Iran and North Korea may be developing EMP weapon technology. This is why we must remain vigilant in our efforts to mitigate the effects of an EMP attack. Okay, so if that's the case, and what you're not trying to, and the real issue here is you're not trying to cause us fear or something, then why don't you just spend a couple of $1 billion to do it? Because we've already been told the price tag. It's $2 billion. You guys lost $2 billion last week. You can't even find it. It's somewhere in the dust bunnies. Don't tell me you can't solve this problem. Say, you know what, for the next 30 days, we're not going to spend any money on anything until we get this problem resolved. That's what every business would do in a crisis. That's what every homeowner would do in a crisis. That's what every major corporation would do. They'd say, we're going to cut spending everywhere until we have enough money to solve this problem. Because if it means the end of business as we know it, then it's worth it. But you guys won't. You're going to just remain vigilant in our efforts to mitigate the effects. Remain vigilant about what? Fix it. Don't watch it. When I read stuff like this, I see a plot. Because I'm reading between the lines. And I'm hearing what these people are saying. Go and read this story for yourself. It's out of the Free Beacon. I'll post it in the body of this thing. Go and read it for yourself. And tell me that this doesn't sound like a setup to you. I mean, the doom and the gloom is there. The idea that literally, vast, and I'm talking about a third or more of our population could die off. Listen, if the power was out for a month, we'd lose tens of millions of people. I mean, just the guy who had to carry water, who hasn't walked more than 50 yards in the last 2 decades, he's 325 pounds, and he gets up and suddenly he's got to carry a 5-gallon bucket of water a quarter of a mile, and he keels over from a heart attack. All the people who rely on medical devices to remain alive, pacemakers and insulin that has to be refrigerated, and people who require oxygen and breathing. And I mean, look, 30 days, it'd be all over for 10 million Americans at the very least. And in 60 days, the cities would be eating each other. Think about it. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, Fed Chairman Yellen, she's unsure if we are a capitalist republic or democracy, or if we are an oligarchy. Hello? Isn't it your federal financial policies that have made us whatever we are? Don't you think you ought to know, Ms. Yellen? Or are we just yelling in the wind? We're going to take a break. You can email me at mike@americasvoicenow.org. We'll be right back. All right. So, the other day, I exposed to you an argument that was put forth by Princeton and Northwestern universities, a study that says that we are no longer the United States of America is no longer a republic, that we have now become an oligarchy. The headline, and this is in this is an article from Ben Swan, but you can find it all over the place. Princeton study declares U.S. government an oligarchy. A new study from Princeton and Northwestern universities has stated that the United States government more closely resembles an oligarchy or a corporatocracy than a republic or a democracy. Princeton and Northwestern. And yet, yesterday, our new Fed chairman was introduced and questioned in a hearing that was held, in which she was asked a couple of key questions. And one of the first was, and she dropped the bomb that deficits will rise to unsustainable levels. Well, pardon me, but they're already at unsustainable levels. Wait until you hear these numbers, folks. Fed Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen, referencing the Congressional Budget Office's long-term budget projections, told the Joint Economic Committee of Congress that under current policies, the federal government's deficit, quote, will rise to unsustainable levels. In the next 10-year budget projections it released in April, the CBO estimates the federal government will run an additional $7.618 trillion in deficits from 2015 through to 2024. By the way, everybody knows it's probably going to be double that number because they're always the Congressional Budget Office is always conservative in this stuff because they represent Congress and they don't want to look as inept as they are. And at the same time, the CBO projected that the federal government's debt held by the public would rise from $11.983 trillion, $12 trillion, to $21 trillion. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, these numbers are so staggering. And what kills me is, first of all, the Fed doesn't even exist constitutionally. It has no legitimate, legal, moral, ethical right to exist. How do I know that? Because our founders told us that we should never allow that to happen. And a private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberty of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Thomas Jefferson. He went on to say, but with the respect to future debt, would it not be wise and just for that nation to declare in the Constitution itself that they are forming, that neither the legislature nor the nation itself can validly contract more debt than they may pay within their own age or the term of 19 years? It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes, a principle which, if acted upon, would save one half the wars of the world. Let me just refresh your memory on the first sentence again. A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army, and we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Hello? All right. Since we know what our founders thought of it, why have we allowed it to go on? Well, because we've allowed the Fed to have control of our economic future. And the Fed is a private cabal of bankers. And Congress treats these people like they're the king and the queen of Siam. When these people come in, in Congress, they can't bow and scrape low enough. You ever hear them talk to these people? I mean, the deference that they issue to them and speaking to them. You know, oh, thank you for coming to this hearing. We're so anxious to hear your opinion. Your opinion? Chairman Yellen says, when asked, are we still a capitalist democracy? Or have we gone over the cliff into an oligarchic form of society in which incredible economic and political power now rests with the billionaire class? That was Bernie Sanders, the Vermont socialist. And Yellen comes back and says, well, she'd prefer not to give labels. In other words, it's already way too late for you guys, but you don't want me to say this publicly. The way these people bow and scrape when they talk to them is just unbelievable. I mean, the deference in their voice. What recommendations? This is Dan Coates, the Republican senator from Indiana. Here's what he says. What recommendations would you give us in terms of dealing with this uncertainty that is basically causing a lot of these businesses to underperform? The hell does Janet Yellen know about running a business? She's never run one. The question, guys, you have no idea how insane this is. I want you to read these two articles because the issue here is they're questioning her as if she has some inside crystal ball-esque ability to read the tea leaves of the future, and her Ouija board will give them some magical answer. Coates remarked that businesses in Indiana and the business people in Indiana constantly go up to him and they say they're underperforming because of uncertainty in the marketplace and because of federal taxation. They don't know what's going to happen. Regulatory policies, Obamacare, all these other issues, right? The same thing that we all know to be the cause. Superb regulation that is so massive, nobody knows what to do. You've got to hire compliance and regulatory policy officers in the corporation to make sure that you're following all the rules. I just did a segment on it. It's costing us what was it? 1 point some odd trillion dollars a year to comply with it all. What recommendations would you give us, oh Oracle, in terms of dealing with this uncertainty, oh Your Highness, that is basically causing a lot of these businesses to underperform? He asks her. Oh, great wizard. Nobody gets to see the great wizard, no how. So I agree with you, says Chairman Yellen. My own discussions with businesses, I hear exactly the same things that you are citing. Concerns with regulations, about taxation, about uncertainty, about fiscal policy. She just reiterated exactly what he said. She goes on to say, I guess one recommendation that I would give you is that long-term budget deficits we can see in, for example, CBO's very long-term projections that they remain. Well, that's not a recommendation. That's a statement. She goes on to say, there is more work to do to put fiscal policy on a sustainable course. We have heard that lie, there is more work to do, from every politician's mouth from time immemorial. And that's not a recommendation. That's a statement again. There is more work to do to put fiscal policy on a sustainable course. Well, no kidding. Gee, thanks. That's like sitting there and saying, yeah, your kid's going to get older as time goes on. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Then she goes on to say that progress has been made over the last several years in bringing down deficits in the short term, but that a combination of demographics, the structure of entitlement programs, and historic trends in healthcare costs, we can see that over the long term, deficits will rise to unsustainable levels relative to the economy. Okay, that's not a recommendation either. That's again stating the obvious. Thank you, Captain Obvious, for the third time in one paragraph. She goes on to say, and putting in place a package of reforms. Ones, I know these are very controversial matters, but ones that would probably help confidence. Okay, so thank you, Captain Obvious. We need reform. About what? Can we get more specific? You see, the joke here is that this is the same crap that Greenspan was telling us. It's all vaguish. That's what it is. It's a new language. It's called vaguish. Well, of course, we need to be able to pull back and I don't have any details I want to give you currently in the moment, but we're working on plans, and we've been planning this for quite some time, and these plans are very extensive, and they're very thorough. And shut up. The only plan you have is you're planning the demise of the entire flippin' nation. And you and your cronies, Congress, the Fed, these corporations, the multinationals, the billionaires, the corporations, the people in government, the corporate governance groups, you've all set up yourselves and your own personal families. You know, it's like you've all built your own little arks, and the heck with the rest of the small peasantry. You know, we've got 1,000 arks for 1,000 Noahs, but everybody else be damned. Ones I know that are very controversial. Here's what Coates then said to her. I mean, talk about, Your Highness, I bow before your greatness. Listen to what he says. Coates then goes on to say to Yellen, you join a long list of very responsible Americans who have the experience and the expertise to give us some warnings about what may happen in the future and our inability to act over the last several years. Now in addressing these major problems that are going to have significant consequences on the economy of this country and on future generations. Did you just hear what I just heard? Oh, your magnificence. You, madame, join a long list of other very responsible Americans, all of whom, but you amongst them the highest, have experience and expertise to give us, the lowly, the foolish, some warnings about what may happen in the future. Please uncap and uncover your crystal ball, milady. Oh, Oracle, tell us what may happen in our future. What will happen as a result of, quote, our inability to act over the last several years in addressing these major problems that are going to have such significant consequences on the economy of our country and future generations. Please, madame, oh, consult with the mighty gods and tell us, oh, what will become of us. He continues. I almost want to puke right now. I don't know what it is going to take for us to summon the will to do what we all know that we need to do. But I appreciate your adding your name to that long list, saying you have a responsibility up here, and you're not fulfilling that responsibility. She didn't say that. Thank you for the public flagellation and lashing, my lady. Thank you for looking into your crystal ball and exposing me in front of all of my colleagues, my good friends across the bar, and my good friends across the other aisle over here, because thank you for summoning the courage and having the will to do and tell us that which we all need to do and we know we should do. I appreciate your adding your name, your mighty, magnificent Federal Reserve Queen name, to the long list of others who have said to us, you have a responsibility up here and you're not fulfilling it. Thank you for lashing me publicly, my lady. May I do anything else to earn your chagrin, your hatred, your disgust? Is there anything else I may do to generate your puke on my back? Think about the words this man used. Think about it. Tell me that what he did there if he came home that night and his wife didn't smack him with a frying pan as he came through the door and busted his nose for cowering and groveling, before what? The Ice Queen? Unbelievable.
To us in terms of dealing with this uncertainty that's...
I'm going to let you hear it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the way he talks to her.
Basically causing a lot of businesses to underperform.
So I agree with you. My own discussions with businesses, I hear exactly the same things that you're citing. Concern about regulations, about taxation, about uncertainty, about fiscal policy. I guess one recommendation that I would give you is that long-term budget deficits, we can see in, for example, CBO's very long-term projections that they remain. There is more work to do to put fiscal policy on a sustainable course, that progress has been made over the last several years in bringing down deficits in the short term, but that a combination of demographics, the structure of entitlement programs, and historic trends in healthcare costs, we can see that over the long term, deficits will rise to unsustainable levels relative to the economy, and putting in place a package of reforms. I know these are very controversial matters, but that would probably help confidence. As regulators ourselves in the aftermath of a financial crisis, we also can see very clearly, for example, that the kinds of regulations we're putting in place during the process of doing that create uncertainty and burdens. We hear this, for example, from community banks all the time. And, here I would say, to some extent, the regulations, we're doing this for a very good reason. We had a financial crisis. It's important to make the financial system safer and sounder. And for our own part, we will try to make sure that we worry about regulatory burden. We we try to design regulations that are different and appropriate for different sectors of the economy. I think it's important for us, too, to be sensitive to regulatory burden in order to minimize its impact on the economy. But we are doing things that are important to make the economy safer and sounder.
Well, thank you.
2.5 minutes, and she didn't say a dagnab thing. Talking about, and we're not done. I've got another minute to play for you. I got to tell you something. Sitting there trying to tell us that like this financial collapse came out of the blue completely, like a storm on Mars that just showed up at 200 miles an hour. Nobody could have predicted. She is the regulator. They're the cause of it. Boom and bust. And every time there's a boom and every time there's a bust, they strip a little bit more power, a little bit more resource, a little bit more money. Where do you think the American nation has gone in the last 100 years?
Thank you for that answer. And in closing here, because
yeah. So now let's hear Mr. Beggar, because
that are important to make the economy safer and sounder.
Well, thank you for that answer. And in closing here, because I've been noticed that my time is up. You join a long list of very responsible Americans who have the experience and the expertise to give us some warnings about what may happen in the future and the consequences of our inability to act over the last several years now in addressing these major problems that are going to have significant consequences on the economy of this country and on future generations. I don't know what it's going to take for us to summon the will to do what we all know that we need to do, but I appreciate your adding your name to that long list, saying you have a responsibility up here and you're not fulfilling that responsibility. Thank you.
You got to be kidding me. I'm going to shoot myself in the head, Queen of Mean, Queen of Ice, and I'm going to thank you for ordering me to commit suicide. politically. Do you ever see Congress people talk to anyone else on a witness stand like that, with that level of deference, with that level of bootlicking? When he came home last night, his wife should have been standing there waiting at the door and gone, pow! The truth is, I'll tell you what, he doesn't kowtow to his wife like that. It's an embarrassment. They're an embarrassment. He's an embarrassment. She's an embarrassment. What did she say that qualified her for such deference? What? What was her oracleness? Anything? Anyone? Bueller? Can anybody find any one thing that she had to say that was so world-shaking, so enlightening, so insightful, so articulate? It was a mealy-mouthed spew of 2.5 minutes of diarrhea. She didn't say anything. Thanking her for being a loyal American. Loyal? Responsible? How is the Fed responsible? Their balance sheet is $5 trillion flipping bucks. And they printed it from nothing. If you can find responsibility anywhere in that picture, I'll pay the debt. The whole $5 trillion. You know why I don't ever have any fear of covering that bet? Because the Fed is anything but responsible. They are as regulators, she said. Did you hear what she said? As regulators. Well, if you're regulators, then how did you allow regulation to not meet the requirement to keep all these banks in control? Because you own them all. They're all you anyway. That's like China saying, we're not responsible for North Korea's actions. Of course you are. You are North Korea. North Korea, from the Chinese perspective, is just, that's like the little brother who carries all the dope for the big brother who runs out to the corner and sells the crack. He leaves it with his little brother so that if somebody gets popped, the kid won't go to jail for more than 6 months in a juvie home. But he doesn't want to do 40 years in a federal pen. China uses North Korea as an excuse to go out there and say, let's see what the United States says when we do this. And they send North Korea out to do their bidding. In North Korea, it's the same thing here. These banks are owned by the Federal Reserve. That's like the police department investigating who robbed the bank when it turns out it was every member of the police force. I can only say one thing right now. You're listening to America's Voice now. I am glad this segment's over because I got to go vomit. You've been listening to America's Voice now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. You can communicate with me directly. You can send me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. Send me an email. Tell me what you think of this episode and this segment. Then do yourself and me and everyone around you a favor and send it off to anybody else who doesn't understand what the Federal Reserve is and educate them quick. We'll see you Monday. God bless you. Have a great weekend.